And that conversation really got me thinking about the intersection of these technologies with some of the fringe economic experiments that were running at that point of time. And I could see how these technologies would enable new economic systems to emerge and come in from over the horizon into more, I would say, mainstream capacities. So since then, I've been very actively involved in what is known as reputation economics. And so building economic systems that are multidimensional. And so neighborhoods is a manifestation or an application of such an economic system. And we can get into it, but it's basically an alternative way of organizing interactions and people in socially distributed environments like the internet. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
That's pretty good. Thanks very much for that, Sid.
Thanks,
so,
Tom.
Yeah, we'll play Paul's video because I just think Paul really nails it with what is Holochain, especially in light of all the world issues.
Hello, my name is Paul, and I work with the Holochain.
So Paul's actually the one who does all the documentation, all the technical documentation at Holochain. So all the programs at Holochain are busy coding, and then Paul sort of like formulates it and puts it in plain English for everyone to understand what the programs have done and how to use the technology. So he's kind of well positioned to explain the
Holochain project, where my job is to figure out how to explain Holochain to the world, what it is, how it works, and why you should care. Sometimes it feels like a big job, like I'm being asked to describe reality in one paragraph and give at least 3 examples. Not that I think that Holochain equals reality or anything, but reality and Holochain are both kind of complex. Not complicated, which is kind of a bad word in engineering, but just that the level of complexity is appropriate to the problem at hand. And maybe that's the best place to start. What problem is Holochain actually trying to solve? Generally, it's the same problem that everyone in the DWeb space is trying to solve. Concentration of power, which leads to loss of human agency, which leads to all sorts of other nasties. Everything from my internet is down and I can't access my reports now to a major democratic nation just got hacked by social media and now it's throwing 500 errors. But when you take the big organization out of the middle, it gets a bit messy. With no police force, there's no way to tell who or what can be trusted. And infrastructure can break down too, and there's nobody to fix it. These are serious usability problems, and the centralized world has largely figured them out, for better or for worse. Centralization means maintainability and simplicity for engineers and top-down enforceable safety and reliability for users. And the DWeb needs to figure these problems out or nobody's going to want to use it. We just want the simplicity, reliability, and safety of the centralized internet, along with the self-determination that people want. Is that too much to ask? That's why the decentralized world spends so much of its effort on system integrity. Depending on the application, that means different things. It could be event ordering, availability, access control, authentication, data validity. Now, before I get into how Holochain tackles these issues differently, there's a few plain details that I want to share about what it actually is. Holochain is a framework for building peer-to-peer applications. It aims to ensure system integrity without needing central coordination. There's no servers and there's no blockchain ledger. Each application enjoys its own isolated network built by all the people who use it without any particular maintenance effort on their part. So now that we know what Holochain is, let's go back to how it tackles system integrity. So now, while blockchain inherits the centralized world's assumption that there must be a single authoritative truth, Holochain starts with a simple observation about the real world. The only thing that really exists is individual agents making observations and then taking actions, and most of the time that works out pretty okay. That's because as we gather information, we share our observations with others and we receive their observations in turn. And gradually, everybody's perspectives converge on a pretty decent approximation of the truth. Now, let's see how this works in practice. So in Holochain, the basic ontological unit is the agent. That's you, or rather the software that runs on your behalf. For every application you use, the Holochain runtime hosts a piece of code on your machine called the application's DNA. You exercise your agency in this application the same way you always do on a computer. You do something and it triggers a function call. The difference here is that everything is happening on your machine. Your DNA exposes some functions as an agent-facing API, and these functions can write data, retrieve data, process it, and connect with other agents in the network. Now, whenever the DNA wants to change local state, Holochain records that action in an event journal. There's one journal for each application. And your DNA is also expected to expose a set of functions that act as a validation API. They encode the rules that define what valid data looks like. What squares is the knight allowed to move to? How long is a tweet? Can you have a negative balance on your account? Who's allowed to look at the company directory and who can add new entries? Now, since you and your peers judge each other's integrity based on the data that you produce, this is pretty darn important. These rules govern the actions of the group of people who belong to the application's network. They prevent you from accidentally doing something bad, and they help you detect malicious intent in the people that you're interacting with. So this is Holochain's first pillar of system integrity, intrinsic data validity. The application's validation rules, plus some basic cryptographic proofs provided by Holochain itself, help you deterministically answer the question, given what I can see, does everything look correct? But a lot of peer-to-peer technologies do that. For most applications, especially finance, law, governance, that's not quite enough. You also need to know things like, is what I'm seeing everything that there is to see? You need some way of knowing that the person you're about to buy a house from, for instance, hasn't already sold that same house to somebody else last week. So for this, Holochain adds peer witnessing. You see, some of the data that you write to your journal gets shared. First, of course, any application data that's meant for other people to see, like tweets and other public things, but also as a header for each of your journal entries. Then a small random selection of your peers gets that data that you produce, validate it against their copy of the rules, and then they store it. This creates a shared database for the application. It's held collectively by all the users. This is great for availability, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the important thing here is that the network remembers what you've done. And the most basic rule, the rule shared by all Holochain applications, is that you can't modify data that you've already written to your journal. It's an event log. It's not a random access table or anything like that. And if any of your peers catch you tampering with this journal, they remember this and report it to the next person who wants to check up on you. So the other thing that your peers do is they check the integrity of all the application data that gets published to the shared database. The neat thing about this is that if any of it breaks the application's rules, the validators broadcast a message. It's kind of like an antibody that lets others identify the bad actor. This gives the network a sort of immune system that lets it respond more rapidly and efficiently to threats. Rather than waiting for someone to discover invalid data when they retrieve it, the validators can sound the alarm as soon as it's published and take action. Usually that looks like ejecting the bad actor from the network. So this is sounding kind of complicated, but fortunately all this stuff either happens in the background or is abstracted behind an SDK that gives you pretty straightforward data points for your code to act on. Now, going back to availability, spreading the data across all the users' machines also makes the whole thing more resilient to network disruptions. You always have access to your own data, even when you're offline. And there's a pretty good chance that you and your office mates on the same network can still connect with each other and share the information that you do have. This helps reduce lost days of productivity because some poor admin fat-fingered a command in a faraway data center. Not that that's ever happened to any of us. Anyway, the nice thing about dropping the need for a single source of truth is that Holochain is just a lot more responsive and efficient than blockchain. There's no effort wasted on reaching global consensus. And because only a small selection of peers holds each piece of data, the individual burden of participation is pretty light. We expect that for most applications, it'll be light enough for a smartphone. In fact, in our early tests, we managed to run 50 instances of a DAO-like application on a Raspberry Pi, which is not that bad. So enough about how Holochain works under the hood. What can you actually build with it? Well, pretty much just normal apps. It's just a framework. It's just one that happens to not need a server in the middle. You can build online communities, team productivity tools, knowledge repositories, supply chains, IoT networks, financial apps, et cetera, and it even has some value as a local first plus cloud backup system for your own personal data. So you might be wondering, what's it like to build a Holochain app? Well, I won't lie, it's definitely different. Some of your design choices will get harder. For instance, when there's no single source of truth and not everything lives in one place, you might have to get clever about how you model and represent data. The shared database is just a big hash table with links between records. So you do have to think of it as sort of a graph database. And you have to think about what data is safe to share and what should stay private on people's devices. But other things actually get a lot easier. For instance, security and scaling and uptime are a lot more manageable because there's no centralized failure points. And in terms of modeling user-centered business logic, all of your code runs from the perspective of the individual agent. And there's no such thing as user registrations and logins. Everyone just represents themselves with a public key that they create. And niceness is built in. You don't have to worry quite as much about the moral or legal impact of data collection because privacy is kind of default. Users aren't locked into a particular way of interacting with your application either because the app runs on their machines and they can call the API of the application however they like. And they can always take their data with them if they decide to leave. And if you're used to writing blockchain applications, it's a bit more forgiving. Upgrading an app or forking a network isn't a governance crisis like it is on blockchain. It's just a normal part of the DevOps cycle. So where is Holochain at right now? Is it ready to build on? Holochain isn't production stable or feature complete yet, but it's definitely ready to start hacking and prototyping on. We've spent the last year refactoring it based on feedback from devs and our own learnings. And devs are telling us it's pretty nice to work with now. So if you want to start working on a Holochain app, here are some details that you need to know. DNAs, the backend of your application, run in a WebAssembly sandbox. So you'll need to write in a language that compiles to WASM. And we've also got an SDK for Rust, which makes things easier. You can write your front end with any language, framework, or toolkit that you like. You just need to remember that it runs on your users' devices. It talks to their locally running Holochain runtime using RPC calls over WebSocket. Now, in terms of platform support, Holochain and the dev tools run on Linux or Windows 10 with WSL2 or any machine with a Linux VM. And we're also working on native macOS and Windows support. Now, mobile isn't supported yet, but getting Holochain working on resource-constrained devices has always been a top priority for us. So that'll help when we do start looking at mobile. The networking code works. All traffic is end-to-end encrypted. And we run a public bootstrap server to help peers discover each other and a public proxy server to help punch through NAT gateways and firewalls. There's a small but growing ecosystem of tools, libraries, and learning materials to help you get started. And the community is just really lovely and really supportive. And lastly, we're building a hosting service, decentralized, of course, called Holohost, which will let you offer your apps to users over the traditional web. And that's it. Thanks for joining me. And I hope all this made sense. And I'm excited to start talking with you about Holochain in the Q&A. See you there.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so that was really quick. But
so hello everybody.
That's Hidayat. He's one of the Holochain community teachers. He's hilarious. But, yeah, does anyone have any questions right now about all of that? That was a lot, but anything on your minds right now?
Sorry, is there a token or an asset associated?
There is, yeah. Yep.
Did you say it's based out of UAE?
Say that again?
Based in the UAE? Is that
no, it's the team's all over the planet, really. Yeah. But there is a token. But it's not a token for Holochain. Holochain is actually a free framework. You don't need to pay to use it. You can just run it. It's completely open source. You just download the framework and then you run these web apps or these Holochain, they call them apps, and you run them on your computer, and it's just connecting to other computers. And I like to kind of think of it as blockchain upside down. Everyone's running their own sort of like little chain box of chains. And then when they meet other people and they want to make a deal, they just choose to use the right smart contract, the right DNA code.
Able to test themselves. Questions have been raised over whether the plan will work. Those who are close contacts with.
From my understanding, the Holochain building a reputation system.
No. So, but yeah, basically, the easiest way to think about it is like blockchain. Everyone's like hosting these blockchain transaction verifying computers with Amazon and Microsoft. Holochain is designed to just propagate across our laptops and our computers.
Just a question in relation to the security aspect. If it's only on one computer or hard drive or device or whatever, can't it be quite hackable? Or like, you know, is there a security issue there potentially?
So in blockchain, you're getting all these random computers to verify your transactions. In Holochain, you're only getting the computers that need to verify the transactions. And if they verify the wrong way, they basically get knocked out of these Holochain networks.
Okay, so it's only the computers that have been connected with that computer, and then they share the data with one another. And access and verifying. So
we might say, you know, this is an example. I give you $5 and we're tracking it on a Holochain database. Okay, so we got to pull off the smart contract with DNA code that manages the transfer of a $5 asset. So the transfer should be a decrement of one and an increment on the other agent. So we just prove that we're going to use that code. So we both run the same instance of the code, and we check each other's sort of that we're running the same code first, and then if I'm debiting, you know, you crediting basically, and just checking for that. And then when you go and do a deal with somebody else, it goes and you might say, hang on, I don't feel comfortable just doing a deal willy-nilly, but give us access to a few, and this all happens in the behind the scenes of Holochain. You don't have to worry about this. Give us access to the last 3 deals that or source chain entries that you've made on your personal computer. No, not on a Microsoft computer, not on an Amazon server anyway. It's actually just on your computers. And if that checks out that, you know, I was debited and it was credited, and then and you run the same code on your computer, and then you're validating our code, and then later on you go and do and then that's when you feel comfortable doing a deal.
But
radically, it's just literally how we think.
So that's how transactions are done. What he's trying to understand is, like, for example, from what I think is that, okay, so proof of work is secure because each block is connected to each other, so the computational power to be able to hack that network. So they're wondering if it's just on one computer, and you two are doing how can a hacker not come in and hack your computer and change it? Yeah.
So it's not blockchain. It's just a little bit of cryptography. Do you want to answer that one, Sid?
Limitations still exist though, unless
they're just worried. They're just asking about why.
Yeah.
Did you hear it? Oh, I can.
Yeah.
Okay, Sid's going to answer it this time.
I think you addressed it. You pretty much addressed it, Tom. But I will also add, because there's no universal snapshot of the truth that's being captured in Holochain, there's no, what's the word, like a honeypot that needs to be cracked. Like data is really scattered. You might not even know whose data exists on what little tiny node. So even if you do manage to break one device and access that information, you will have access to like random bits of information that you don't even. So the incentives just aren't skewed the same way it is in the case of blockchain. So I think that's just the way that Holochain is landscaped, and something to keep in mind when these questions come up.
You could, if you right, but not in the first generation. No, you just do it.
So
it's only yours. So there's nothing else to hack but only your data. So
So another question on top of that. Sorry.
Thanks for that, Sid. Though. Yeah.
Sure.
Makes sense.
How do you get to the trust?
The Byzantine general problem. The Byzantine general problem that Bitcoin solved, Holochain doesn't solve.
And another one, if the data is on a single computer.
So I just want to point out that this is not a blockchain. So it's not like some sort of like 51% attack or anything like that. It's just you and me are agreeing to act. Just the way we've all agreed to walk in here and not like do anything bad. We've got these social contracts.
But we agree.
So we're both agreeing to run the same.
And he doesn't know we've colluded.
We're both agreeing to run the same instance of code. and we check each other's hashes. And then we record that on our source chain. And then that all gets policed by the next deals we go into. So it's really safety by numbers.
But how do they know?
Yeah.
How do they know?
But again, the
This is what the
Collusion.
But
You
just
got-
another that. Let's say that one's pretty effective. There's no problem
Yeah, go
with
for
that
it.
happening. What if you have
Yeah.
certain data simply stored on your computer and that something happens to that computer? Is
Yeah.
that sort of stored on other people's
Yeah.
computer? Can you get it back, or what's
Like
the
if that
solution?
computer crashes or you break that computer, that's
Yeah.
where that data's gone.
Yeah, so the way you answer that one is basically when you're saving Holochain data, there's what we call a resilience number, and you choose how many times you want it replicated across devices that you trust.
Okay,
So you mark,
make a
you
city.
actually manage you don't have to blindly trust anonymous people out there in blockchain world and just hope that the protocol is going to work and not crack at some point. Or, we just end up cracking crypto. We always do.
Yeah.
But in this world, you're choosing who you trust. So you might choose, 5 of your 10 best friends or something like that for a key recovery, but they don't know who they are. But, if I say, for instance, get in an accident or something, I don't remember who I am, you need to go through a recovery process. So 5 of those 10 friends that I marked that I trust will then, get pinged and say, hang on, did Tom have a car crash?
So it's
And
like
they
a
got to
seed.
verify. It's more connected to our social fabric, basically.
So you're sort of saying that if I go to purchase something from a merchant, I'm trusting that merchant to carry out the service or the good or provide the goods that I'm paying for. If you didn't trust that person, you wouldn't go through with the transaction in the first place.
Yeah. And then this is about having trust signals. Okay, what are the things about that merchant that you actually do trust? So, and it's an incremental thing. So security or whatever you want to call it will happen in a creep.
Whether you're going to a
environment.
bricks and mortar store and buying something, or you're going down a dark alley and saying you're going to get the deal and then paying for it.
So what
Yeah.
you're saying is someone who's new in Holochain network has no trust, and
Yeah.
therefore, they have to earn the trust. So their transactions that they have with you can either be trustworthy or not. And if they aren't trustworthy,
That's pretty much it. They get flagged. Yeah. And then
they're
you don't talk to that person anymore.
So, but
or
it's
we
a
work out
risk,
why did
though.
that flag happen,
It's a
and we do
risk.
some new code.
So if you will, like,
How do I double spend?
well, if you're going to sell me your house on the Holochain,
I sell it to you
and
and
the
him
first
and him.
time you're on there, how do I know?
You don't, because I'll collude with everyone else to make you buy
I
it.
think I'm going to.
All right, let's
I'm
stop
going
that
to
now.
just interrupt here.
Okay, guys. Yeah.
We will-
That's I can just quickly add the collusion question is an interesting one, and there's a bunch of videos out there. There's this app for mutual credit that's been built by GM, one of the community members, and the collusion question comes up there, for obvious reasons. And so I'd recommend checking out some of those videos because they address them very specifically. But the short answer is, if there are two people who've colluded, like let's say, you say you've sent me some coins and I say that you have, even though that transaction didn't happen, that transaction is sent out to the network to be validated, and we don't have control where in that network it goes to get validated. And so assuming that, you have a network, let's say of, 5,000 people or maybe 100 people. Obviously, if 99 people in that network are colluding, then that network, isn't going to be functional. But if it's just 2 people or a small group of people that are colluding, it will be caught out or at least flagged for you to notice. So that's how it will.
Is dependent on how effective the party is able to connect and build their particular personalized or personal circle or whatever, rather in comparison to like the blockchain where it's like a global initiative on every part and everyone that joins the system, strengthening for everyone else. There's a
yes. So our sense is you'll see networks in Holochain that will extend into the tens of thousands or maybe the hundreds of thousands, unlike blockchain, which goes into the millions, for example. And so you'll see different organizing patterns emerge. And so let's say you're a community in Brisbane that might be 5,000 people. You have your own private network that you validate stuff on.
So did you get that? That was just a big part of the whole thing. So you're running your own private networks based on the people that you trust. So it's like the CFO of Holochain said that Holochain is more like the Linux of DL. So what you do is if we're going camping or we're doing something together, you know, we don't need to report all that to some giant blockchain, all our transactions. We create it just immediately within context, creates a little distributed ledger, facilitates it with one button, or just straight away, and all of a sudden we've got a DLT. And whenever we do deals together, we do a DLT together. And that's it. So it's like, yeah, it's like collusion on steroids in a way. Like we get to collude, and then later on, you know, I go and do a deal with somebody else.
Trust is inclusive.
Yeah, yeah. So that's another way of thinking
So it's
out
not
of
like
that.
it's trying to essentially replace like blockchain tech. It's
No,
more
no.
like an application with certain specific instances
Yep.
that can be used as the one that you just mentioned.
Pretty much, yeah. So we might have a chat together. We just have a chat history, and that's it.
Mm.
But we might do some
I see.
financial transactions in the world. But now in our chat, but when you know now we've got 7 machines making a copy of that transaction. That's good. That's secure. It's lightweight. It's not using huge, heavy resources, and it's just propagating on our phones
Isn't
and
the
devices.
market
But they're having to
Bitcoin
develop
is great for financial transactions,
One
but
point
also
of time.
It's coming. Yeah.
blind
It's
things.
very niche specific. things to
Yeah,
have,
very
so-
niche specific things, and I think that's what maybe neighborhoods is gonna go into a little bit.
So yeah. So well, let's take the stage properly now. Sid, did you want to give any more about Holochain or introduce them to neighborhoods?
I think that's a good way to segue into neighborhoods, actually. The whole, moving into more contextual private networks. Do you want to play the video?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so there's a lady called Emmeline, and she created a video, the first video attempting to describe neighborhoods. So I'll play this. It's not as long, it's 2 minutes.
First, there were platforms. Clunky, inefficient social organizing tools. Your data in silos. Thankfully, cryptography is evolving to enable greater autonomy, creativity, and collaboration. Still, that's not the whole picture. Our mission is to proliferate unique flavors of life online. Neighborhoods is a way of organizing the crypto web that allows groups to shape digital spaces to fit their specific culture and activities. Let your culture flourish, not some companies. Your past actions and the brownie points you scored for them are stored on your computer. That means you can take them with you and display them to other communities who then validate their truthiness on a distributed network of peers. Got a craft guild? A meme network? A city initiative? A Skillshare circle? Make it a neighborhood. That means bundling small, basic modules of pre-built code and groupware. Then, design the rules, norms, and culture that fits your network. Each neighborhood decides amongst itself what counts as good behavior, which posts or profiles merit high visibility, and much more. Neighborhoods are their own intentional cultures, and members carry their own records, meaning they can be used by other neighborhoods to make sense of who's who across the distributed web. We're reclaiming reputation data from Black Mirror nightmares. When you can control it, and metadata preserves the context that it emanates from, reputation isn't scary. It's what makes a truly distributed social web possible.
Thank you. Should I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it, Sid.
What timeline are we running? Oh, I think I need permission to share my screen.
Go for it now. Try again. Well, what's the time now? 6, 7. So we've probably got about 30 minutes.
Okay. Cool. We can keep it as interactive. Maybe I'll run through a couple slides and then we could.
Yeah, if the energy is dropping
interactive.
off, we'll let you know. Or if it's picking up too much, we'll tell you to slow down. But yeah, easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
What information are you using for that assessment?
It's
Yeah.
just,
What?
it's posture. Posture.
Wait, does everyone need to get a refill?
Just, everyone's just going to get a quick refill of their glass.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So just we're giving them 60 seconds.
Okay, cool.
5-minute break, they're saying.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you start talking around it for sure. And so for and you guys are new, right? Crypto, so some of that free a little bit.
Yep, how much further are you
Because I just know what you're talking about.
Hey, Sid, can you hear me? Oh, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
This should work.
Oh, there you go. Now I can hear you. Maybe we'll just go through like kind of an express version because it's not on the big screen. I think it's really hard for some people to concentrate. So what I'm thinking is that they're getting a little bit more from the dialogue. So maybe go through it quite quickly, and then we can unpack it with the questions. Just because our audio is not working, we've got everyone sitting around looking at the laptop. So I appreciate that.
That makes sense. Thanks for the heads up.
What we're going to do is he's going to fast track through his presentation, and then we're just going to open it up for Q&A at the end. Yeah. All right.
All right. Yep, we're ready again. Sid, go for it.
Okay. Give me a sec. Okay. I think it'll be nice to start off from that question we left off at, which is what is Holochain really enabling? And for us, or at least when we first, engaged with Holochain or the architecture of it, one thing was clear for us: it's shifting us, or it's moving us, or it's creating a shift from global consensus to contextual validation. And I think there are applications where centralized blockchain networks are important, especially in cases like crypto. But there's so many instances where contextual validation can be really, really helpful and important. One of the problems Paul and Tom brought up with blockchain was just this lack of, like, you don't know who you're really dealing with on the distributed web. And that's one of the major problems that you have with internet-like environments. And when we first saw Holochain, it was pretty apparent that Holochain could lead us to newer ways of organizing ourselves on the internet. And we thought about this concept of reputation currencies. And I know there's a lot of people, that don't normally associate reputation with currencies, but when we use the word reputation currencies, we think of, something like a like or a clap or a swipe or a timestamp that can signal something to a group of people in a specific context, right? And if you try to store a like or a clap or a timestamp on a blockchain network, it's going to cost you $20 or $30. And that basically means you only end up storing reputation data that has monetary value. But like we all know, not everything has monetary value immediately or at all. And so what you lose with the blockchain is a whole bunch of like this multi-dimensional data, which could otherwise be useful in different contexts. And so Holochain moves us to environments where maybe, we're a group of 5,000 people or 50,000 people that are communicating with each other. But because we're kind of small, we have a network that's shared between us. It's almost like a private network. We can actually start storing information like likes and claps and timestamps, because there's not such a heavy overload to storing this information like there is in blockchain. So if you try and store a like in Ethereum, like I said, it's 20 or 30 bucks, and that just doesn't make sense. So this is basically, the direction that Neighbourhoods taking us in, and I'll talk more about it, because reputation currencies enable localized sense making. So like I said, we might be a group of 5,000 people, and maybe all we do is share funny memes with each other, and we have some way of recording what's funny in our context, right? And so maybe we use likes, maybe we use upvotes or downvotes, maybe we use the number of posts to signal who's funniest in our groups. But localized sense making, or in a case like Holochain, what it means is you can actually have that data stored at your end, and you can actually even run a computation which says, okay, Sid has received 500 likes in this community, therefore he's the funniest in this community. That's the example of computations that you could easily run with Holochain. But that gets a little more interesting, because with Holochain, I can actually share it with my peers. So I could actually share my record of the funniest memes on the internet with Tom and say, here's my top 10 list of people that are funny. And so we have this interesting sharing of reputation data, which it works for Tom because he might like my sense of humor, and now doesn't need to scour the internet looking for the best content. And so he's feeding off my sense making in that context. And that takes us to the next phase, which is really neighborhoods, which is a bunch of people sharing sense making, or a bunch of people sharing reputational computations. And so at the heart of each neighborhood is what's known as a reputation interchange, which allows these groups of people to say, in our community that shares memes together, or maybe plays chess together, or maybe shares each other's couches when they want to crash at someone's place, this is what's considered a really funny person, or this is who's considered, a good chess player, or maybe this is someone we consider a decent person to host in your room or in your home, sorry. And so neighborhoods are emerging as these little pools where sense making can emerge, and people can feed off each other's cultural computations. And again, Holochain allows for this because the costs of storing this information drop significantly. So what is the point of this? Like, are we going to go around sharing little leaderboards with each other? Like, hey, like, Danielle, these are the 10 funniest people I know on the internet. That's kind of absurd. It wouldn't entirely pan out like this. What we're saying is we could be a group of people, but instead of a feed that's decided by Zuckerberg, or the order of the feed decided by Zuckerberg, we could actually have a locally computed feed algorithm, which defines whose content shows up first, which defines who is worthy of being a rideshare driver, who is worthy of following, whose aesthetic sense might be nice, all of it shared locally and not, a universal computation. And by that, we mean in our community, we think of Tom as funny, and Tom isn't universally funny. Like that's not the point of this reputation computation. So as an alternate unit for social cohesion, what we're saying is traditionally on the internet, we've done this in apps. So you go to an Airbnb to look for people you can rent your home to. But what we're saying is, hang on, with some of these distributed technologies and with all of this reputation data being held by communities, maybe neighborhoods could be that place where people gather. And it doesn't need to be neighborhoods. What we're saying is we'll see architectures like these starting to emerge. And neighborhoods is just an attempt to push that conversation and push some of these new architectures over the horizon. And what's interesting is because it's all on Holochain, we might grow to be a community of 50,000 people or 500,000 people or 5 million people, and might start doing livelihood related applications like lending or transaction-based financing or paying each other's salaries. But we can be sure that the algorithm that defines who's discovered and who's trusted and who is worthy of credit is actually verified by Holochain. So the reason we're not running neighborhoods on AWS servers or a centralized server is because you wouldn't be able to verify if that information is accurate in the community. And so Holochain solves for that problem. But Holochain also solves for the problem where, because data is agent-centric, like people hold data at their end, it throws up interesting porting capabilities, which means I'm a member of Tom's meme community, and I think it's hilarious because I love that dark sense of humor. But I might also decide to start my own community that shares memes. And I might also allow porting of reputation from Tom's community into mine, maybe also Danielle's community into mine, maybe also Luciano's community into mine. And so because of the agent-centric nature of Holochain, reputation data can actually port, it can actually hop across neighborhoods. And so you don't have those limitations which normally accrue to communities, which is, because your scale, you're not operating the scale of a Zuckerberg, you can actually say, well, how am I ever going to discover people? Or all my good work is limited to this community of 5,000 people. But instead, you could see patterns where you might be a member of, 1,000-member community, but because it actually has bridges into hundreds of other neighborhoods, you could see infinite network effects for reputation. So that creates these opportunities for new kinds of scaling. So you might have a community where we think of Tom as someone who's nice to host as a guest on your couch. But maybe 100 other communities also share that culture. And so all these communities will start validating Tom in a similar way. So interestingly, like I said, it leads to new architectures where instead of us meeting in apps, we could potentially meet in these pools called neighborhoods. And it's an interesting architecture because what defines a neighborhood is that central cultural computation, which means in our community, this is the sense of humor we share, or this is what we think of as a good chess player. But tools get plugged into that community. So because of Holochain's modular nature, you're seeing these generic widget-like tools starting to emerge, which might be tools to chat with each other or share memes with each other or lend money to one another. And instead of going to a universal meme sharing platform, the way it would work is our neighborhood actually plugs the meme sharing tool within our membrane, or our community plugs the dating tool within our membrane. So you don't actually have to go to a Tinder or a Hinge to match with people. You can actually plug it into your membrane. And so we contrast this with the current architecture of platforms, which is more specific tools and generic culture, whereas neighborhoods flips that on its head. Sorry, Tom, you had a question?
No, I was just like, when you're talking about the dating app, I was just like, that was ticking some people's boxes.
Yeah, that has sense.
I missed the dating app.
Yeah.
What is a dating app? I'm interested.
So you could potentially have a dating app embedded within the Brisbane Blockchain Community. And so that's the kind of, but I bring that up because that's the kind of patterns that Holochain and neighborhoods would start enabling.
Is there a way to make sure there's no wankers on it?
Yes.
I think that's entirely up to you. So
wankers off of the dating app.
Community reputation. Yeah, you have to pass through a few of us. And then,
You have to like date someone and then go give them a
yeah, you have to date a few months, and then
You have a consensus mechanism.
obviously.
I feel like I really shouldn't have gone with that example, but
Yeah. Anyway, mention the dating app again. That one. But we just got a good question here. Go for it. So,
can I ask you, talked about how people who know each other can establish trust because they already have that pre-existing trust, right?
Yeah.
Describe to me a little bit more how that generates momentum on larger groups. So let's typically, when you reach 100, that's That's the maximum humans can manage.
Yeah, yeah.
What's the mechanism for building large groups? How does that happen?
Yeah. So I should be clear and upfront. Like, I think Neighbourhoods isn't entirely meant for communities that are functioning today. So I think that scale that you mentioned, 50 to 100 people, they actually work really well when they meet in person. And I think humans are great sense making and feeding off each other when they're interacting with each other at that scale. I think Neighbourhoods is looking at applications that blow past this 500 people number and go into the thousands or hundreds of thousands and beyond. And we don't want to jump into this territory of, look, it's 5 million people who deeply trust one another. Like, I think that's too much of a swipe to take. Like, it's too much of a bite to take in one go. And so I actually think very, close to the ground utilitarian applications is where Neighbourhoods should land initially, and which is why I bring up that example of playing games with one another or sharing memes with each other. And I love the example of memes because with memes, the sense of humor is so critical, right? Because sense of humor isn't universally shared. And does actually thrive when it's specifically articulated. So let's say we're a friend, we're 100 people who share memes with each other in a WhatsApp group, and it's hilarious and it's fantastic. And more people start to join, and all of a sudden you start losing control, and the culture of that group gets diluted, and before you know it, that sense of humor is lost almost. So Neighbourhoods would allow the founders of that community to say, these are the cultural rules through which people get amplified. So you could say in our community, we validate people through likes or upvotes and downvotes or star ratings. And it also matters who you get a like from. So let's say if Tom is the founder of that meme community, if you have a like from Tom, it's worth 10 compared to Sid's like. That's just a really crude example. But that's how you would start translating and expanding that neighborhood while maintaining pretty strong control over its culture. So over time, you'll also see people create these cultural templates. So you could say the sense of humor in this community is really tightly controlled. And so only the top 2% show up in people's feeds. Or you could say, hey, it's pretty loose and inclusive. Anyone who shows up from day one can actually get amplified. So the first example of an exclusive culture. Well, I should let you in on a secret. Like, it's definitely one of my ambitions to create a meme community with very tight control. So that's.
You have a question?
Yeah. We just got another question here.
Yeah,
so like the reputation of a particular person is dependent on the certain community that they're specifically in.
Yes.
So that reputation for that specific person, if they connect to another community, is not reflected. Is that correct?
So we call it Memetic Bridging. So that reputation data ports if that other community requests it. So if that other community thinks that the sense of humor of this other group is relevant to theirs, they might request it, and you would have that choice in allowing it.
So if you're on the lowest grade,
and then
you can be a player in Brisbane and then go to Sydney, think that you can play because we're gonna be like, no, hey, great Brisbane.
But how would they get notified?
If Sydney asks for it, it's Sydney asks for it. Yeah,
but it might be if you want to join another neighborhood, you have to. It might be they have one of these things when you join a DLT, which is what a neighborhood. It's just a distributed ledger.
Yeah.
They have these membrane rules, and if you want to, and that those neighborhoods get to choose what those membrane rules are. Yeah. And one of them might be that you have to be funny in another neighborhood before you can get to this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like it's just all, that's all.
Like that's that is scalability of a social rating system. Like,
is to say that.
If
I go to another neighborhood, how are they verifying that I'm funny? In that new neighborhood.
If in this reputation I'm pretty bad, but I go and connect myself into another community that
But
Their
that
own
community can
reputation.
ask for that information.
But how would they
Fair
know? Is
Yeah.
it going to happen automatically?
So it's like
or-
No, they
judge,
can ask for
jury,
it.
and
Yeah, it happens.
So they can see the history of the
Only if you give
of the
permission.
previous communities.
Only if you give permission.
But like,
Only if you give
Well, it's
permission.
always your private data that you'll say.
But like-
you're always the one that gets to choose.
guys,
So
it's a social rating system. Like this is not good. No, like you can.
so you could show up in
people,
Listen to
guys.
Sid again. All right, guys, we'll just.
yeah. So you could show up in a community and choose to not port over any of your information, but you're basically showing up as a blank slate. And it's up to that community to decide what they want to do with blank slates. Maybe they allow you into the various levels of the community, or maybe they don't. But
Would we
there
ever make that happen? That we might let blank slate people in, we might not.
And we don't
Yeah.
share information.
If they're not funny.
They could
Gotta
just say that I'm new to
I'm
the
happy to let not
neighborhood.
funny people.
Let
Yeah,
me in.
I'm not.
Well, I just think I have no other data.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
Anyway, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a great. These are great questions. So what I really want to bring out here is this alternate architecture to meeting people and designing on the internet, because it's interesting to observe the dynamics of platforms, right? Like if you want to rent your home on Airbnb, you have to buy into the culture that Airbnb imposes on you, or the culture that Zuckerberg imposes on you on Instagram or Facebook. And so we're kind of locked in because all we want to do is share pictures with our friends, but there's this genetic culture that's imposed on us. And so Neighbourhoods is flipping that and says, no, you actually can have access to genetic tools and layer your specific culture over it. And yeah, so you might not have to go to a dating app. Dating apps are embedded in the various communities that you might be part of, or various neighborhoods that you're part of. And to enable that, Neighbourhoods is facilitating what's known as a low-code marketplace, where Holochain developers can actually build these really widgety, modular, interoperable, generic tools. And so we envision people building out these really slim, modular chat apps and peer-to-peer lending apps and seed sharing apps and chess playing apps. But these chess playing apps don't layer their own cultural agenda. Like they're not saying, in our app, these are the best, this is what we consider are the best players. They allow communities to layer their culture over it. And so each neighborhood is really, at the heart of each neighborhood is the cultural computer, but orbiting that cultural computer are all these generic tools that the neighborhood uses.
But
And
an
so,
example on just to cut in there,
Yeah.
Sid, just an example on chess reputation. One of the things might be that you might record in chess reputation. Maybe if the person who made the chess app, when you go to a normal software, it's like they always say the top player or something or whatever. But in a neighborhood, you might measure the player that beats people the fastest or something. That might be important. I don't know, it might not be, or maybe the player that is the slowest. Like things.
Yeah, or for some neighborhoods, the number of games you play may not be important, or the quality of your win, like how much you win by, might be important, like, or who you win against might be important. And obviously chess is pretty one-dimensional, but it could move into other kinds of, like, maybe it's playing tennis with someone.
So
yeah.
what's the market saturation of Holochain at the moment in terms of neighborhoods? How many neighborhoods are out there, and what's the market saturation worldwide?
Well, Holochain is in pre-alpha, and so is Neighbourhoods. So at this point in time, I will say Holochain and Neighbourhoods are pretty closely interlinked. So we are pretty active in the Holochain community, talking about these architectures, helping host hackathons together. But yeah, in pre-alpha stage, so there's not functional neighborhoods
We'll
out there.
probably be running a neighborhood here, and we'll be testing it all out.
No, but what I'm saying is, how many neighborhoods are out there? Where is the saturation in which countries, etc.?
Yeah, so there are no neighborhoods out there because we're pre-alpha, and so
Yep.
and we're not so geographically focused, we're more ecosystem focused. So at this point of time, we've decided to work actively and roll out actively within Holochain. And so we're looking more at like which communities would we work with actively. And so after Holochain, as more Holochain-like technologies come up, we'll probably, explore other ecosystems to work within as well. Go for it.
We have a question. Yeah, it's better.
One more question, and then we'll let you keep going.
Two more.
Well,
Two
two.
more.
Yeah.
Two questions.
Oh,
Go
because
for
we're
it.
going to get up to the low code
Okay.
marketplace.
So
Yeah.
pre-alpha is beta, or what is pre-alpha?
It's like it hasn't launched yet.
So it's beta. Okay. And
It's pre-alpha is beta. Well, pre-alpha is pre-alpha.
okay. Okay. Thank you. Great explanation. The best one.
Yeah, but basically there's not people out there using the software.
That's beta. Okay.
Okay, question.
Yeah.
Okay, so because using Holochain sort of design, if I insert myself in a certain community or whatever via my computer, via this particular computer I'm using, and I get a bad rep, but I then change the computer or get rid of it.
Yeah.
Identity is that sort of a
That's
possibility?
so I think this is a fascinating conversation, very linked to the way you think in distributed environments. And in centralized environments, you have the luxury of complete information about a person. But in distributed environments, you only really know what you know. And so the way you architect culture is, hey, we know this. And if you show up with if you show up as a blank slate, you might just have to hang around in the lobby of our neighborhood. And so the way you incentivize people to share more information is if there is more context for me to go off, then I can engage with you deeper. It kind of works with, it's like if Tom says, sorry, what's your, Dan. So if Tom says, Sid, meet Dan, he's a great guy. That's context for me to work with, right? But if I just pass you on the street, it's really hard for me to make sense of who you are and what I should do with you. So it's the way real life works. Like when I have more context, there's more basis for me to make assessments on. And so with what you're suggesting, like if I just keep switching identities, I'm going to keep showing up in neighborhoods as a blank slate, or with, instead of 10 years of rich transactional data, of which maybe I can get a loan, I'm going to show up in a neighborhood with 3 days of transactional data for which no one's going to give me a loan. So, yeah.
A quick follow-up.
He's doing a quick follow-up question.
Let's say I have a bad rep from one other party in the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then
I know what you're thinking, and I like that mind of yours. But that's that is yeah. But this is the landscape of the distributed environment. You have to assume you don't know everything about everyone, and so given that caveat, you plan accordingly. So this comes up particularly in reputation designs for environment related, climate related cultures. Like you might say you recycle your plastic, but you might take a private jet every month to go somewhere. And so you can't make sense of people just on the basis of how much they recycle their Starbucks cup, right? Like that doesn't make sense. And so there's ways to work around it, but the short answer is, as you have more multi-dimensional data, you can take larger and larger leaps of faith with people. But you don't try and do large assessments in one go or very early on is the short answer.
Yep. All right. Let's
Thanks, Dan.
Continue.
Right. So to enable these architectures, one of the problems we came across was people want to build these kinds of communities, but they're usually not great with development or fundraising. And it's kind of silly to ask someone to raise $200,000 just to start a meme community or to create a new app just because they want to share some content with each other. So the low-code marketplace allows for these generic tools to come through and for communities to have access to these really basic, simple tools with which they can engage with each other. And that's what our financial model, that's what our business model is linked to. because this marketplace is what allows for widget developers anywhere in the world to say, I'm going to create a little interoperable modular chess widget that can be plugged into any community. And as more and more communities use the tools, the costs for that widget start dropping because the number of users share that cost. And so internally, we have a crypto accounting system based on a unit of account called Neighborhood Credits, which allows for transfer of value between communities and developers. And so the objective for doing all of this is to make it easier for community creators to not have to develop this stuff themselves. So you basically got neighborhoods infrastructure with which you create your culture, and then you smash together a bunch of generic tools which let your community do things with each other. Not to each other, that would be weird. But that's the point of the neighborhood marketplace. And within the neighborhood marketplace, you have a native neighborhood token which facilitates payments. And so it's also, you could say, the sustainability model for neighborhoods. There's a bunch of technical stuff about rep lang and rep interchange, but I think that's kind of, I don't know if we go in there.
Yep.
But yeah, that's it.
I think we've got the general gist.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think people got the gist, and really, basically, there's a NHT token out there, and this low-code marketplace. People like you and me can go and then go. This is the vision or the idea. You'll be able to go to this marketplace and say, I want to build my own distributed ledger, which is a neighborhood. And in that distributed ledger, we want to have a banking system. We've got a token system. In that distributed ledger, so we'll probably use the NHT token. And in that distributed ledger, we want to have peer-to-peer lending. So we'll have the lending app. But you will pay a little bit of NHT token to have that built onto your DHT, onto your distributed ledger. Does that make sense, Sid? Is that right?
Yeah, that's about right. And so NHT becomes the mode of payment within the ecosystem.
And because this code is already been built, like in terms of like a lot of it would have already been paid for by another neighborhood, it's going to be radically cheap because it's not like a big job or anything. It's just about connecting these little modules together. And eventually, I reckon the vision will be that people can just drag and drop their own modules into a dashboard that they want to see for their community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's exactly right, because I think we've reached a point with code development where you look at an Uber, you look at a Grab, and you question why it might be worth how many tens of billions of dollars. And the answer obviously is because it stores that data. But in distributed environments, data isn't siloed, it's at our end. And so that radically unbundles the development or code model, business model. And so we think there's new business models emerging for code, where if there is a developer creating something, it can actually be shared across all the users that use it, all the communities that use it. So like Tom said, it's allowing for new kinds of, I would say the dream is for these costs to radically drop for access to basic tools.
So cost of development radically dropped because of this.
Yeah. And so who knows, like steady state years from now, if you want, the idea is for you to be able to pay cents for your community to access basic chat tools. Like it's not rocket science. And there shouldn't be a social cost or monetary cost to using them.
Does anybody have any dying questions? I know for those at the back, it's a little bit hard to hear, and I thank you for your understanding and patience in our AV issues. And I thank you for asking all the questions.
A quick question.
No, like I'm being serious.
They're good questions.
They're great questions. And I'm not sure, Sid, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, thank you very, very, very much. I don't know if anyone
Thank you.
has any dying questions. The way that I personally see it is that I sent a message to Tom the other day after I watched actually another video explanation, and I encourage you guys to go home and do a little bit more research and really wrap your head around it. But I felt like these guys are like, this is the next wave, this is the future, this is like where it's like people trying to tell you to buy Bitcoin 10 years ago. Like these guys are looking at real world problems on how we can actually use distributed ledger technology to actually solve everyday issues. Because at the end of the day, Bitcoin wasn't built for microtransactions. It wasn't built, it offers a lot. There's a lot of value in blockchain networks, but it's not going to solve a lot of the issues that we need about creating trust amongst communities. So I really encourage you to go in and try to learn and understand a little bit more, because 10 years from now, you're going to be like, what? I went to this meetup and I learned about that and I didn't pay attention.
Thanks for the hype, Danielle.
And they did not pay me to say that.
Can measure that one.
I am
Measure that one.
agnostic. ATV.
That's a bit of reputation data right there.
Yeah, 5 likes for you.
5 likes. Yeah.
With that being said, I think we will wrap it up. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle.
Really, really, really appreciate it. And look forward to, where are you based again?
Singapore.
Singapore. Well, we look forward to the day that you can fly over and we'll fill the room for you.
Love it.
Soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
Hey, thanks very much for that. Yeah.
Bye.
All right. So I don't even Saturday microphone. So yeah, thank you very much for your guys' patience. I know for some of you in the back of the room, it's a little bit hard to hear.